I love to ask, how many of you are currently in real estate? You've heard me do this. And some people will raise their hands. And then I go, wrong. You're all in real estate. You're either on the side of real estate that's making you money or on the side of real estate that's making someone else money. All right. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to Replace Your Income with Kevin and
Steve. How are you today, Kev?
Steve has been working really hard on his impersonation of the dogs singing Jingle Bells. So we're going to kick it over to you, Steve. In 3, 2, 1, go.
That was a good try, Kev.
Okay, all right. Well, I thought we'd... but you know what we are doing today is because it is towards the end of the year, we thought that this would be a really good opportunity to kind of say, all right, what's the state of the market? We got some really cool statistics that we looked up and that we're going to be talking about. This is just some really interesting things about what we're seeing in the market, what's kind of happening in general with investment real estate. And so we are calling this episode Stats That Stun, mostly because I like alliterations, but also these are really kind of fascinating statistics. So, Steve, should we dive in?
Let's do it.
Now, before we dive in, actually, I just want to remind everybody listening and watching that very soon you are going to be hearing some announcements about the first opportunity that you're going to have to be able to get your hands on Micro Wins to Millions. We've done the episodes on the book and what's coming in the book. We are really close to being able to launch something, and I'm so excited. And so I want everybody to just kind of, hopefully you're sitting with bated breath, waiting for the opportunity to get your hands on this thing because it's going to be awesome. So stay tuned for that. It's going to be coming, and we'll have a special podcast episode probably early January of 2024 where we're going to be sharing some stuff. So it's going to be awesome. But for now, Steve, let's jump into these stats. Every time I hold a piece of paper, I always feel like I need to do the Rush Limbaugh thing. I just rattle the paper.
That's funny. I think the same thing.
And I'm sure that Justin, when he's editing this podcast, I'm sure that's really fun on the microphone. Is that good?
Yeah. Don't you want to say something like in my formerly nicotine stained
fingers?
Hands?
That's right. Mine are more Diet Coke stained. That's kind of
and still currently,
which is weird that I'm sticking my fingers in Diet Coke. Anyway, okay, let's go to the statistics. All right, Steve. So this first one that we're going to share is kind of an interesting one. Here's what it says. It says only 17 million Americans own at least one investment property. Now, here's what that means. That means that less than 5% of Americans own investment real estate. Now, granted, we're taking that stat based on the total number of Americans, which at the time that we're publishing this podcast is just under 331 million. And as you pointed out before we started rolling, obviously there's going to be children in there, but there are still hundreds of millions of adults in the United States of America. And if we just look at the stat on a surface level, there's only 17 million investment properties across 330-something million Americans, meaning 5% of Americans own investment real estate. Now, of those, Steve, one of the other things that we've seen and that the stats are kind of showing is that the majority of real estate investors own 10 or fewer properties.
Which is a pretty interesting, thing to contemplate. And the significance of that and what that means to us as individual real estate investors as well. The fact that the vast majority of all rental property owners are mom and pop shop kind of businesses. So it's just, individuals, just regular people buying rental properties. And, yesterday we watched a clip in our weekly meeting with our team, and we watched a clip from Barbara Cochran.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
From Shark Tank.
Yep. And she made her most of her wealth initially in real estate.
Yeah.
She sold her real estate brokerage for like $66 million. But an individual close to her pointed out to her, it's like, well, but that was a very small amount compared to the real estate that you purchased that you held on to for a number of years. And I love the phrase that she used, which was, I wait for the properties to become fat and juicy, and then I take them out. And she talked about how initially most of these properties, many of them had negative cash flow. Some of them just cash flowed a little bit, and other ones did a little bit better than others. But she built this portfolio understanding that in the beginning stages of it, there wasn't a whole lot of return, so to speak. there, overall, it sounds like she had some return, but she waited and she was patient. And on some properties, as long as 18 to 20 years. And that's when she called them fat and juicies, and that's when she harvested them, when she sold them or refinanced them or did something like that. And that was the larger portion of her wealth that has been created over years.
So not just the brokerage, but the property she bought and hung
And
on
so
to.
my point in bringing her up is she started out as a mom and pop shop.
Yep.
So she was just a regular person who got started in real estate. And even when she had a real estate brokerage, and she probably was doing pretty good with that, she just would buy a property here and buy a property there, single family homes, multifamily, complexes, commercial buildings, and just bit by bit over many, many years built this portfolio.
So here's a question that I've got. So why is it now, when I first saw that statistic, just in terms of the percentage of Americans that own investment real estate, it kind of took me back a little bit, because I go, okay, I don't know that I've ever, maybe I'm sure at some point I've had a conversation with somebody who's like, no way, real estate's the worst thing I've ever heard of. But for the most part, most everybody that I talk to is always interested in real estate. Like everybody. I get this all the time. I get it at church. I get it when I'm coaching basketball, which I just started coaching basketball for my son. And I was talking to one of the parents last night. I get it at church when we had our Christmas party at church, and I had 2 or 3 people talk to me. They're like, hey, we've been seeing your podcast and your shorts. And they're talking about real estate. And in general, it seems as though the vast majority of adult Americans would love to own, buy, have something to do with investment real estate. So why is it that only 5% of Americans in general are owning investment real estate? Like, what is, I would love for us to try to figure out why that is. Like, how would we diagnose that?
My guess is this, Kevin, because there are a lot of people who have the resources to get into investment real estate, but they don't realize or recognize that they, number one, have those resources.
Yeah.
They haven't identified the fact that they could use, a 401k or their retirement funds. They don't realize that, their friend, their neighbor, their brother, a good, somebody who they know well is a resource to them, and they could partner with them. They don't recognize the equity in their whole life insurance plan. Like there's a myriad of different resources that people don't recognize that they have. Number one, they don't think they have the resources. Number two, they don't know where to begin. They don't know where to start.
Yeah, right.
They don't know if their own personal market, a home down the street, would make a good rental property. And so it's kind of like this idea. It's like, well, some people only think of rental, properties as being like multifamily. It's like, well, if it's not a duplex or a fourplex, then it's not investment. And they're not thinking single family. And so the other thing is not understanding like what to get into to rent, but then it's like the how and the lack of confidence in kind of the expertise. It's kind of like, well, I could like go buy a property, but then what? Like, what do I do with it? Like, if it needs some fix up, where do I put my money? A lot of people put their money into areas of the home that don't produce a return. There are certain areas of the home where you get your biggest bang for your buck. And so people understand that maybe intuitively, but they're kind of lacking that definitive knowledge and that confidence to move forward. Another thing that they're lacking is like a team. It's like, number one, like, how do I like find properties, let alone like, how do I identify the right market, but how do I like get out there and actually find a property? And how do I know if I found a good one? And, again, lacking that expertise, that knowledge, that understanding, that confidence to be able to pull the trigger on a property, thinking or knowing that, hey, this is going to make a good investment. And the next thing, well, what are you going to do with that property? Depending on what the market is doing. And a lot of people are kind of like, well, I don't really know what the market is doing. And even if they do think they know what the market is doing, they're wrong about what they think the market is doing.
Right.
And again, it gets back to that confidence level. And then another factor, of course, and this might be one of the biggest ones, is just the time factor. People are so busy. They're caught up in their lives, right? It's like investing in real estate is one of those things where it's like, it's a someday. I'm going to get to it, when, this situation happens. And so between work,
future.
family, their church stuff or sports, like kids, all that kind of stuff, like doing real estate is time consuming.
Pickleball. I mean,
pickleball is a
just
big one.
Think of how much time that
like
takes.
it can can take hours.
Dominate your life.
It can dominate your life. And so the time is another big factor. So I think that all of those, Kev, like, and you combine all of those together, and there's a fairly significant barrier to entry for the small investor to get into it. And the other thing that Barbara said yesterday when we were watching this, Barbara Cochran, is that it's that first property. That's the hardest one to get into because it's kind of that inertia to make the decision, to do all the things, go through all of the steps to actually get into that property. And what do our clients say all the time? It's kind of like, oh, well, that wasn't so bad.
Yeah,
that wasn't so hard. And so it's kind of that initial, like, just figuring things out, getting into that first property. And from there, things can kind of grow and snowball and move forward.
I actually disagree with all of that. And I think that the main reason that people don't get started is because they're not sure when they get 4 homes on that property how to make it into a hotel. That's a Monopoly reference is what that was, in case you missed that. Okay, but you know what? But I was sitting here.
No,
and
I totally got it, Kev.
Monopoly.
I'm just kidding.
I was thinking about Monopoly because I'm like, this is what's interesting to me. Every single kid has played Monopoly, right? My kids have played Monopoly. And here's what we learn in Monopoly, right? Yeah, you learn that you may go to jail, but you also learn that you keep going, you earn some money as you go, and the idea is I want to own property. I want to buy property, and then I want to buy more property. And if I get enough property that's all in one sort of location, I can start to make more money. But if you think about it, like, we learn, even in Monopoly, this game that everybody loves, there's about 1 billion kajillion versions of Monopoly, and it's always the same thing. Buy cash flowing property. And then buy more. And then the more you buy, and you know what's so crazy is you think about Monopoly, like, sometimes people are just, there's always those people that sort of hold out for Park Place and Boardwalk. And if they can get it, and they can get those two, they can start to turn some major profits, right? Just like maybe you would if you owned real estate in Manhattan, one of these really nice buildings. But for me, I usually whoop on my kids because I start to buy all the other stuff that they're not interested in. This is just what I do. And all of a sudden, before they know it, every time they're going around the board, they're terrified because they know they're going to have to pay me. And it's such a fascinating concept that you start somewhere, and that somewhere starts to earn something, which gives you the ability to acquire more. And the more real estate you acquire, the quicker you can win the game. And so we have this as a baseline foundation for all of us who play Monopoly. Yet then we become adults, and we're like, well, I don't think that that's true. And probably because we know that when you own property, it doesn't mean you can just put more houses on it and turn it into a hotel. But it's just so fascinating to me that if only we're all playing Monopoly, but only 5% of us are actually owning investment real estate. And if I were to summarize all of the amazing stuff that you shared about why people are not doing it, for me, one word, besides thinking of Monopoly, one word came to mind, and it's this: uncertainty. I'm just not certain, right? And if we were to equate uncertainty to sort of an emotion, we would probably equate it to fear. And fear is absolutely crippling. And there was never anything in history that was accomplished if we were completely acting out of fear. And fear is different than caution. And I think that we sometimes confuse the two, right? We sometimes think, oh, well, I'm being conservative and cautious, when really all we're being is fearful. And so there's all of these factors that you just described, which all amount to uncertainty, which really we could boil down to fear, because all of a sudden it's real life and real money. It's not Monopoly money, even though actual money is kind of fake money too. But in a certain sense, right? I mean, it's all.
And here's one more reason why people don't get into the market, because oftentimes people feel like, I missed it. I missed the opportunity. It's like, I missed the 2007 recession. I didn't buy when home prices were cut in half. Like, I might as well never try again. And then the same thing happened again, right before COVID, and then after COVID. And it's like everybody's always feeling like, I should have back then. So it gets back to what we say all the time, Kev, which is, when is the best time to buy real estate? 20 years ago,
yeah.
And when is the second best time? Today. So that's something that's easily overcomable, and maybe easier said than done. because I totally get kind of the mentality, the thought. It's like, man, the average priced home in Utah right now is like $535,000.
Yeah.
It's like things aren't gonna keep going up. But that's what we always say. It's all relative.
Yeah.
I would even say this. People talk about the debt.
Like the national debt?
Yes,
Yeah.
the national debt.
Like we could pull up the that debt clock thing and all get depressed together.
And the one thing that I think is important to remember is the debt, the national debt, it's all relative. If our economy continues to grow, and I can't remember the exact stat, but if our economy grows on average, I think it's like 1.5% annually over the course of years. If we were to kind of hold our debt steady at this point, like the debt becomes nothing within like I think 10 to 15 years or so, because our economy is so massive.
Yeah, if it grows.
It just outgrows that. Yeah. It's kind of like when I first started out, my career, my adulthood, it's like for me to go out and get like a car payment of $95 a month. Like that was huge.
Yeah.
When my dad bought his first house, his payment was $135 a month.
So
and
crazy.
He didn't know if he could afford it. And he shared this with me. He's like, I didn't know if I was being wise, a wise steward of my money to go and take on this debt for this home, for this payment of $135.
Right.
Well, and what happened to his personal economy? What happened to my personal economy? My personal economy, his personal economy, it grew over time to where that $135 a month debt became literally insignificant.
Sure.
So from that standpoint, I relate that to the national debt. It's the same thing. Like people just think it's like it's going to destroy us, and it would if our economy stopped growing.
Right.
If our economy continues to grow. So it's the same thing when we just look at ourselves individually and we're thinking to ourselves, it's like, oh man, it's like I'm gonna take on this, now an investment property, and the properties that we buy, the average purchase price is $275, and we think it's like, oh man, it's like that's a big burden, like that's a big risk, and there is risk, and it could be a burden in certain situations.
Sure.
But looking at from the whole, like that payment on that $275,000 property, and you got this, call it an $1,800 or $1,600, $1,700, $1,800 a month payment that is hopefully being paid by your tenants most months. And we won't get into all the benefits because we talk about that all the time. But this concept that 10 years from now, 15 years from now, like you're going to be saying to yourself then what you were saying to yourself now that I should have bought 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. And if you did buy that home, you're going to be 10 or 15 years from now, you're going to be like saying, I am so glad that I bought it. It's like, can you believe it? I bought that home for $275,000. It's worth $475,000 now. Right. And that payment, it's like, I pay my kids that in allowance every month now, So it's all relative. And I think that that's an important thing for people to understand as they consider this idea, this fact, this data that you shared with us, that only 5% of the population is actually investing in real estate, and the rest aren't, for all of the reasons that we just discussed. But if a person can get over that, can get through that, it can be one of the single greatest economic decisions that they make to propel themselves forward.
And, as you're talking just about all this stuff, here's another thought that occurred to me. And this might be a little bit of a controversial hot take, but we did an episode a few back on, me getting a Tesla. And it was funny because the comments on YouTube, somebody, I don't know if you saw that, Justin, somebody was like criticizing the fact that I was wanting to get a tax benefit, right? And then somebody else was like, no. The idea is the government's going to tax. Government's going to tax, okay? Government's going to government, and government's going to tax. So it's our job to try to mitigate and minimize the amount of taxes. It's not to say that we don't want to pay taxes and we don't want to contribute. It's just that this was the thought. You were talking about the debt being relative, right? And I was thinking about this. I was kind of joking in my mind because, if you've listened to this podcast, probably kind of how we feel about taxation, about, government involvement in people's lives and about freedom and stuff like that. But I was like, oh, here's a really easy way to limit the amount of debt. You just tax everybody to death, right? And then I was like, obviously that's not the case, because what you do is you de-incentivize people to produce. And so here I'm thinking about real estate, and I'm thinking about why people are not buying real estate, and thinking about the fact that the 95% of Americans that aren't owning real estate are missing out on tax benefits. And whoever our person was on YouTube, I don't think they were trying to troll us, but they're saying, oh, well, we're paying for your tax benefits, is basically what they were saying. And here's the idea. If the government's going to tax no matter what, right? That's going to if we want to grow the economy so that the debt is relative, it becomes incumbent on those of us that have a desire for expansion to expand that which we are made stewards over. Now, the expansion can come from the income that we make on our day-to-day job. And how do we use that income? How do we allocate that income? Are we wise stewards of it? Your property is going to grow in equity. If you own a primary residence, it is going to grow in equity. So you could hoard that equity and feel really good about it. That's totally fine, but that's not necessarily expansion. If you were to tap into some of that equity, assuming that you're doing it the proper way, working with a company like ours, it doesn't have to be us, but somebody who can advise you on how to allocate and utilize that equity, whether that's in a home equity line or whether that's through a refinance or however you want to do it. And all of a sudden, now that which has expanded for you, you now take and allocate to another piece of real estate to create some additional expansion and minimize the amount of taxes that you're paying. All of that translates to you expand. Your wealth expands, your real estate expands, your income expands. And that's why one of the other statistics that's on this paper, I got to find it real quick because it says real estate investors earn 45% more household income than the average household. And now that one, we could say, well, of course, because they're already wealthy and so they already earn more. But that's not what I think. I think what this is I look at when we started to invest in real estate, and all of a sudden my entire financial life expanded because I was paying less taxes. I had more income coming in. Real estate, as we've talked about 1 bajillion times on this podcast, provides financial benefits for you in multiple ways. It's all about multiplication and expansion. And so it's incumbent upon us as Americans, if we want that national debt or whatever it may be to be, kind of relative, we've got to expand that which we're given. And only 5% of us are doing it from a real estate investment standpoint. And to me, it's kind of depressing, honestly.
Well, Kev, one of the biggest things to this stat that you just shared, where the individuals who own real estate, they have 45% higher, income,
household income.
So I think that has more to do with the mindset than anything,
true.
right?
Yeah.
And the reason why I bring this up, yesterday I was listening to Charles Payne. He's a broadcaster, he's in news, but he is an investor. And everything that he does, he's written some books on it and that kind of thing. And he made a really interesting comment. And he said, of all of the stimulus checks, which were meant for those who needed help, those who were suffering from the pandemic and that kind of a thing, the government sent literally trillions of dollars, right?
Much money, right?
He made this comment. He said, within 5 to 10 years, all of it, every last penny of those stimulus checks are going to reside in the pockets of the wealthiest people in the country.
Right.
And the reason that happens is because of the mindset of the wealthiest people, who they are investing, they are building businesses, they are providing products and services to the rest of the country. So what did everybody do when they got their stimulus checks? They bought flat screen TVs. They upgraded their phones. They paid their rent. They bought products. They had to buy food. All of these things that they then sent that money to the businesses that provide those products and services. Yeah. And he kind of, he's like, every one of those dollars will end up in the hands of the top 1% of the country anyways, because they are providing the products and service. They are investing and providing all of that, and everybody else is spending. And so
Yes,
those
right.
dollars went in their pockets, out of their pockets,
Yeah.
into the businesses. And then those businesses paid employees who then went and bought more products and services, who the money went back to a different company. And so eventually, like those dollars, like everybody's can empty their pockets, like pull out their pockets. They're empty right now.
Yep, right.
Who got a stimulus check, and those dollars, where are they? Like
business owners.
They're
Yeah.
in those
Real estate
who have that
investors.
mindset.
That's
So I
right.
get back to the mindset of what do we do with the dollars that we get?
Yeah.
And what sacrifices do those who are investing make in order to accumulate enough of those dollars to go and buy some real estate or to build a business or to do something like that? And so anyways, it's such an
That's really
interesting
fascinating.
conversation, and it answers your question or that not your question, but the stat that you shared,
Yeah.
that the household incomes of those who are investing in real estate, because of their mindset,
Yeah.
it's a little bit higher
Yep.
because they didn't just go out and spend those dollars.
Right.
They saved them.
They did something.
They sacrificed going and buying that flat
Right.
screen TV in order to be able to go buy some real estate
Yep.
and make that investment, which then increased their income.
Sometimes when I go do real estate seminars, I love to start with this sort of question, right? And I always love to ask, especially a cold audience that doesn't know us, I love to ask, how many of you are currently in real estate? You've heard me do this. And some people will raise their hands. And then I go, wrong. You're all in real estate. You're either on the side of real estate that's making you money or on the side of real estate that's making someone else money. You're all living somewhere. You're all in a building, and there are owners, and then there are occupants, right? And that's just the reality. It reminds me as well. Here's a good reading recommendation. I think we've probably talked about it on the podcast. One of my favorite books of all time. It is a beast. It is long. It's phenomenal. It's called Atlas Shrugged. And in Atlas Shrugged,
And it's only just over 1,500 pages.
yeah. And if you listen to the audiobook, it's only like 45 hours of audio, but it's so worth it. And in there, they really dichotomize kind of the idea of two groups of people, right? There are the consumers, right? Those that want to consume the goods, the ones that got the stimulus checks and said, cool, I can go buy a flat screen TV. And then there's the producers, right? And the producers are the ones that are owning the businesses and owning the services, so the rest of the world goes round. This is precisely why the idea, sorry if I'm offending anybody out there, who knows, we may get, not that we make a lot of money on YouTube, but you need to subscribe and tell more people about YouTube so we make money on YouTube. So we're not going to get demonetized because we're not making any money on YouTube, but YouTube might get mad at me because...
Stop offending so many people, Kevin.
I'm so sorry. Because this is precisely why the idea of socialism doesn't work, right? Is because when you take from the producers and you give to the consumers, and the consumers have no incentive to produce, but you penalize the producers for producing, that's when you shrink the pie. That's precisely when you shrink the pie. Another favorite book of mine is called The Science of Getting Rich, which is phenomenal. And in The Science of Getting Rich, Wallace D. Wattles talks about the idea of increase. And he makes this comment that's so fascinating to me. And he's talking about sort of how wealth works, right? And he's saying, look, if you apply this mindset, it's kind of along the lines of Think and Grow Rich. He says, if you apply this mindset, these principles, the science of getting rich, then you will have an expansion. But now you may ask yourself, well, if I'm applying the principles and Steve's applying the principles and Justin's applying the principles and Joe Schmo and Becky, and Betty are all applying the principles, don't we shrink the pie? Because that's when we're looking at wealth creation as a zero-sum game, right? It means if I have, you must not have. It's not expansion. But frankly, I believe in God, and I believe that God is a God. He is an expansive God, and I believe that he wants all of us to thrive. And if we're all meant to thrive, then doesn't that mean that there must needs be some sort of an expansion possible for all of us? And what Wallace D. Wattles talks about is he says, let's say that there's a bunch of people that are applying these principles. And let's say you're nearing, he doesn't say it in these words, I'm totally paraphrasing, but let's say you're nearing the end of maybe the wealth that exists, whether that's diamonds or gold. What will happen is God will inspire the mind of somebody to go and find a new diamond mine where they can mine new diamonds or a new vein of gold in the ground or whatever the case may be. In other words, saying there's always the possibility of the expansion and additional wealth creation. The pie expands, it does not shrink. But when we want to penalize producers, the pie will shrink. That's just the way that it works, because the consumers will consume and they will send the money back to the business owners, and then the government wants to get involved and penalize you for producing. Now, where the government right now is not penalizing us is in the event of real estate, right? If we use the tax code and if we use what's there from a real estate standpoint, there are major tax advantages. So then it brings me back to the very first statistic that we talked about, which is this idea of how is it that only 5% of Americans are owning investment real estate? Look, this is ripe for the taking. It is there for you. If you don't know how to do it, that's not an excuse to sit on the sideline and do nothing. What it should be is a reason to figure out something. And that's what a lot of people just refuse to do, because they have that uncertainty, which translates to the fear, which cripples their ability to act. And that is the reason why 95% of us are not owning. Now, chances are, if you're listening to this podcast, you're either on the road to owning or you do own. And so you're probably part of the 5% or going to be part of the 5%. And hats off to you. And I love you for it, which is why you ought to share this precise podcast with any of the other 95%ers out there. By the way, it's also interesting to bring up another topic, not a topic, but another production that I really love, which is The Strangest Secret, which was this record that sold a ton of copies. But in The Strangest Secret, he says something towards the beginning, and he says something along the lines of, if you were to take 100 people, all equal at age 25, all graduating from college or whatever it is, all with kind of this attitude of I'm going to go and take on the world, and you track them through their life, what's going to happen is that 95% of them will end up being reliant on others or will, not be wealthy. 5% are wealthy. It's just statistically, and that totally translates to this exact 5%, that only 5% of Americans in general are owning investment real estate. And so I think what we're trying to say, Steve, is let me read one more statistic and then we can kind of wrap the episode. One of the things that I looked up was about Gen Z, right? So Gen Z are like the young adults. And it says that Gen Z is making its mark in the marketplace. Okay, 30% of Gen Zs are that own homes. There's 30% of Gen Zs are owning homes at age 25, which means 70% aren't. But these are the adults that are coming out of college that need a place to live, that may not believe that they can go and buy real estate yet. So do you want to be on the side of the real estate equation that's making money, or do you want to be on the side of the real estate equation that's making someone else money? Because listen, if 95% of us are not doing it, and just Gen Zs alone, 70% of them are not owning real estate, but they need a place to live. And then we look at the fact that 45% of Americans, their household, of those that own real estate, their household income is 45% more. All of that, to me, adds up to all of these mom and pop investors just need to keep buying real estate. The opportunity is ample. The total amount of real estate transactions in a year, only 20% of all the real estate transactions in a year are investment transactions. So that means that the 5% that are buying real estate are doing 20% of the transactions, earning 45% more of the income, catering to the 70% type of folks of Gen Z that are not owning real estate. I don't know how to read these statistics any differently than the opportunity is wide open for you to expand, for you to have expansion, for you to be a producer and not just a consumer, for you to be able to take a step outside of what may be your comfort zone and step into uncertainty, not through fear, but through the power and understanding that you have a God-given right to be able to expand that which you have stewardship over. So just go do it.
So in the words of our esteemed colleague, Mike Chamberlain, amen, hallelujah, hallelujah, shana-na-na-na.
All right,
that
everybody.
Was that was great, Kev.
Hey, look, every now and then, Steve, you and I have a tendency to soapbox. And really, we joke around about the fact that we may get on our soapbox and you get really passionate about something or I get really passionate about something. To be clear with everybody listening, that passion comes from nothing more than a desire for you to do something more. That's it. Yeah, if you decide to do something more and you come and work with our company, it allows us to continue to expand our real estate portfolios if we do enough and serve enough people, right?
Well, Kev, I was just going to say, is quite literally, everything that you just shared right there is why we exist. Our underlying objective is to take the opportunity of single-family residential real estate investing to the regular person, because there are those who have a lot, and there are organizations and companies who have a lot who do invest in real estate, but our client is the regular, ordinary person who has all of the characteristics that I described as to why people don't do real estate.
Right.
And although we do work with some more sophisticated investors, the vast majority of the people who we help invest in real estate, without our help, otherwise would not get into the game.
Right.
Like, and that is one of the most rewarding things that we get to participate in on a daily basis, and we talk about it all the time. And, you know, obviously we are a for-profit company, but we have like this underlying premise and reason for doing what we do. And it's one of the reasons why we find so much satisfaction in what we do all day, every day. It's what we get to think about day and night. And those who benefit are just the regular hardworking Americans who weren't sure if they could do it, didn't have the time to do it, didn't have the expertise to do it, didn't have the team to do it. And we stepped in, we're able to provide that solution for them. And so it's one of the greatest opportunities I think that we have in life, is to be able to provide that service and that benefit to those individuals who want to and just need to get that first home under their belt, and then they see the bigger picture, and then they get after and start going after that 10 property portfolio.
That's a great way to end the episode, and I will echo, amen, hallelujah, sha-na-na-na-na. All right, everybody, thanks so much for tuning in. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you real soon.
See you later.